When we get started, we might shut that door.
Who are we waiting for?
Mike Myers. We can probably get started. He's going to talk after I do anyway, so you can just shut that door. Okay, hopefully this will be very informal, question and answers. I'll take questions anytime. One of the things that concerned me is when I saw the report that South Dakota was the second most corrupt state in the nation because of our closed records laws. And then I started seeing things in here, and I thought, you know, this is not working like it really should, this whole situation with our state government. One of the things when I was a legislator, I saw that there was, the governor wanted to actually take control of a manpower. It's an employment agency. And manpower basically took the role of a private company, yet it was state generated, and they kind of took jobs away from established people that were already doing the same job in South Dakota. But, in fact, now we have a lawsuit. There are a lot of lawsuits that are in against the governor right now that maybe you're not even aware of. Manpower is there's another company that has a lawsuit against the governor. They said because the lawsuit alleges that the state constitution prohibits the state, the governor's office didn't have any authority to do this. The contract impedes the Congress's authority to regulate interstate commerce, and it violates state and federal antitrust laws. So that's one lawsuit that our governor is in, keeping our attorney general busy. And there's another, this is just one of the businesses that have what I call cronyism in South Dakota. We'd like to go to, it's called Good Jobs First. Got it off of Subsidy Tracker, Good Jobs First. It actually talks about all the different subsidies, 353 businesses, probably not yours, probably not mine, that got, you know, goodies from the state government. For example, Bell Brands, $8 million, maybe a low interest loan, maybe not, maybe a grant, we don't know. But did your business get $8 million from the government? Northern Beef, $5 million, $5 million, several $1 million. Did your business get that kind of subsidies from our government? There's 353 of these. I would like to see the media look through this and see how many of these people that got all these goodies are actual donors to the Republican Party or to the higher-ups in the Republican Party. That's one thing I would like the media to do. Go to Good Jobs First, find out all these people, how many of them are donors, how many of these are actually bankrupt, how many did that South Dakota give their tax money to, that these programs are now bankrupt. There was one in here that is a remodel for a restaurant, I think to the point of 1.2 million of your dollars went bankrupt. Where'd that money go? That's not a success. Anytime there's a bankruptcy, it's a failure. And the state has a lot of failures on this record. Northern Beef is not the only one. This is all kind of in the Governor's Office of Economic Development. This Good Jobs First is. There are some good programs in that Governor's Office of Economic Development, but there are some that are just dastardly, in my opinion. I got an email yesterday from the National Republican Trust, and I am a Republican. I stand by the Republican platform. And this says, of course, it's one Republican speaking to another, so it's going to be anti-Democrat, okay? It says, when I say that Democrats prefer that China own American land, as stated in the subject line, I'm not being facetious. Seriously, Democrats like Harry Reid, Dianne Feinstein, the Clintons, and many other prominent Democrats have taken land from American citizens and American companies and given it to Chinese. Oh my goodness, that's such a terrible thing. Evidently, South Dakota didn't get the memo that Republicans don't do that, because our Republicans in South Dakota are selling industry right here. It talks in here about selling Smithfield. It talks about how that the sale of Smithfield gave 1/4 of the production of pork to communist China. South Dakota did that. South Dakota has also done a lot of business with the Chinese. They wouldn't have to. They could do business with other nations. Israel, for instance, they are a republic. They're not a communist nation. Why aren't we doing business with Israel? Why are we choosing a communist China to do business with? In fact, the Chinese we're doing business with in the EB5. Does everybody understand EB5? is there any questions on it? EB-5 101, it was a federal program where it started, I think, in 1990, where a rich immigrant can buy their green card or their citizenship basically in America if they had $1 million, or in a case of South Dakota, since it's a rural area, if they had $500,000. So any kind of rich communist Chinese or Korean could buy their citizenship if they gave South Dakota $500,000. And South Dakota was the biggest user of that program. In fact, we so perverted that program for everybody else that Republican Charles Grassley was the whistleblower on how poorly Mike Rounds and Dennis Dugard were using that program in South Dakota. We had several of these immigrants that lost a lot of money on northern beef. And you know, had there not been a suspicious death, nobody would have really been researching this at all. But since somebody did die under suspicious circumstances, we started investigating in this. And we found out that there is a lawsuit. There are, I think this represents 70 Chinese people. That's also what's keeping Marty Jackley busy. There's a lawsuit that they want their money back. 70 Chinese people. Now you realize in China it's not capitalism. It's not a capitalist society. They don't own their money like we do. They rent their money. And they put in each $50,000 plus $30,000 to a holding company plus $15,000 for extra fees. So, well over $500,000 each one of these people put in South Dakota. Now, where did that money go? That money is gone. It was lost in bankruptcy in Northern Beef. And like I said, Northern Beef is not the only one. There's several of these EB-5 programs in South Dakota. And so I'm sure they're a little upset. They were upset. They filed a lawsuit. And like I said, in Charles Grassley, I did this past here. Chinese investors, written by the Rapid City Journal, Joe Sullivan, I think. Chinese investors failed in South Dakota. They might be the biggest losers. Can you imagine losing $500,000 in South Dakota? You don't get your visas. You don't get any kind of return on your investment. You don't get your initial investment back. In fact, the reason why they don't get their initial investment back, even though they're promised their initial investment back, the reason why they don't is because Northern Beef was in such bad shape that they had to get some offshore money and financing through, I think, very suspicious ways. And in fact, David probably knows a whole lot more about that than I do. And so they're not receiving anything. So they're just out in the cold. They would be incredibly upset, I would think. They were promised, and then this other lending agency, they got to be first lien holder. That never happens. The last person in to lend on a project is the lien holder. That means in a bankruptcy, they get paid the last. Somehow that lien holder took first place, and the Chinese people didn't agree with that. They didn't know about it, and that's one of the reasons why they're suing. This all just reeks of corruption. If we can't handle a program like that without being called out on Charles Grassley, our next door neighbor here, he was the whistleblower for the poor way we were handling this. I just think that South Dakota needs to be, more into this. I realize that Pierre is a long way away. It's not a very fun place to be. There's not a whole lot of stuff going on, but we really do we do need a media presence in Pierre so we can kind of usurp some of this stuff before it happens. That's one of the reasons why we're considered the most corrupt, is because we don't have a media presence where our capital is. Okay, also in Northern Beef, it wasn't just the Chinese that lost money, it was the contractors. And all this money, it depends on who you talk to, how much everybody lost. But there's a lot of people that got stuck with money, with debt, that don't have their money back. Okay, and it bothers me too that this program, this EB-5 program, was supposed to be just for dairies at first. And we had it with dairies. Some of those dairies did go bankrupt, and so we have this bankrupt program. So we not only add dairies, we add beef packing plants, we add casinos, we add wind generation, and even the last one was our the pipeline that they wanted to come down through Canada. They wanted to have that be in the hands invested of Chinese investors. They want our power company the wind company. They wanted our oil transfer, the pipeline. They wanted our meat packing plants. They want our birds, our chicken and our turkey in the hands of Chinese people. What's happening is that we're selling our foundations, our heritage in South Dakota, things that we work for, we're selling those to the Chinese. Somebody's making a lot of money on this, but we're giving away a lot of what we stand for. A lot of our heritage, we're just giving away to the Chinese, and there are some people who are making an awful lot of money in the process. And you know who that is. It is the people who are very well connected to the government, the governor and his cronies. Okay, that's another one. Oh, and also, if you want to find out what's going on, like there is a lawyer in town here who really wants to find out what's going on here. Oh, he can find out if he has $20,000 to give to the state so they can get the records, so he can get the records. Is that corrupt? That in itself is corrupt. That the state charges $20,000 if you want to get any information from them on this issue. Okay, another one, not just Northern Beef, I was saying, there was Knight and Carver. That's a wind group that we hired. We hired a bankrupt company out of California that did yacht repair. They were going to do wind blade repair also under EB5 money. So we hired a company who was bankrupt to help us in South Dakota here. Oh, they went bankrupt too. Now we have this big building in Howard that they were going to sell to a person in state. In fact, they drugged this guy, he's a friend of mine, they drugged this guy along saying that they're going to sell this big building in Howard, South Dakota. And for 9 months, 10 months, he was on board with it. All of a sudden, right before he had moved everybody to Howard, the state said, oh, you know what, we sold it to somebody else last month. That itself is correct. There is no way, I'm in real estate, if you have an open contract like that going on, there's no way you can drop something like that in the real world. But if you're in this fantasy world where you think you have all the power, in fact, you do have all the power. When you look at who is the lawyers for Northern Beef, you'll see it's Rory King, and his cohort is Ken Gosh. Ken Gosh, you mean the father of the Speaker of the House? So if there's any laws that need to be changed to further his business, to further his livelihood, don't you think that they could just get those laws passed easy in Pierre? That's why business and government should stay separate, because the government has so much more advantage than you or I do. And they're using that advantage, and they're pretending that they're these homegrown boys. No, Dugard was a Chicago lawyer. I mean, he's been around the block once or twice. He likes to say he was in a one-room schoolhouse. He was also in Chicago. You know, he knows what's going on. He knows the ins and outs of this kind of a business, if you want to call it that. Now, he said he did have, he said in the State of the State address that he had an external and independent audit. I would like to challenge that, because the agenda, he has a legislative audit. He has all of his friends on that audit, making sure that they know what's going on. And they have a couple of meetings, and by December they're supposed to have their report ready for this audit. The next agenda, this is the agenda meeting, the agenda for the May 7th meeting. Nothing about EB5 is on here. They're supposed to be auditing and looking at the numbers for this EB5 debacle. They're not even going to talk about it. And they didn't talk about last year. In fact, the leader of this group says, oh, I don't know if I have subpoena power or not. Okay, and then also there's another audit committee, and he had, one of the firms that was supposed to audit was Sulkin, Peterson, Lingle, Walty, and Jones. They're supposed to audit the governor. They paid him over $3,500 for his campaign. This is supposed to be an independent audit when you have your friends auditing you. This isn't my words, this is all the stuff that's on the internet. And another thing that kind of bothers me about why this in the first place got so much attention was the death of Richard Benda. I do have his death certificate here, and I think it's kind of strange. We have, the autopsy is available, but we can't get it. They filed Freedom of Information Acts on it, and the FBI says, no, we're looking into it, so you can't have it, South Dakota media. It also says South Dakota license number, and it's blank. The coroner was supposed to put his South Dakota license number there. It's blank. So I look up the coroner who did the certificate of death. He's the one who said that he secured a gunshot against a tree, used a stick to press the trigger to shoot himself in the abdomen. Okay, I don't want to go off in the weeds on that one. But if you look who wrote that, that was the deputy coroner, Chad S. Peters. He's a deputy coroner. So I called the state, I said, what qualifications do deputy coroners have? None. They do not do the death scene investigation, and they're not supposed to do, they don't have training in that, they don't have training in death registration either. Now, I'm not saying that Chad Peterson doesn't, I'm saying that he doesn't have to. So of all the coroners we had, looking at this death here, we have a deputy coroner who may not have to have death scene investigations or death registration training by the state. I think that's odd also. And so that kind of winds me up on the EB-5. Are there any questions on that? I know I was stumbling around a little bit there, and sure. It's this one.
You mentioned an audit. Exactly what is the audit supposed to be of? Is it the entire state budget or just the EB-5?
Yes.
Or what is the audit of?
The audit was for the Governor's Office of Economic Development, to make sure that the South Dakota Regional Center did all its paperwork that it was supposed to do for the EB-5 investigation.
You've criticized the approach that the current governor has taken and his predecessor for economic development. What would the state's role in economic development, if anything, look like under a Hubbel administration?
Well, it'd be cut down quite a bit. What I would do, I would stop the regulations. We're now regulating raw milk. That's, the government thinks they can regulate raw milk. That would be gone. The economic development, we would still have the investment portfolios that are in there. We have a great retirement system in South Dakota. We would have other programs that have been fruitful in there. However, the EB-5 would be gone. In fact, Charles Grassley, he actually says that one of the reasons that the EB-5 is so dangerous is because it opens a gateway for Iranian operatives to infiltrate the country. A government memo says that. That sounds like, I wish Pat Powers were here so he could call me another tin hat person again, but he's part of my program, by the way, at the end. Now, this isn't me talking. This is a government memo quoted by Charles Grassley. He says that the investor program is for operatives. In fact, these Chinese people, the Korean people, anybody who wants to use that EB-5 program, they are unvetted. The government doesn't know if they're operatives or not. If they have the money, they can come in. Money is not that precious that we can lose our heritage and lose our sovereignty on it. So yeah, that's a problem I see too, that this whole program is unvetted, and I would not have the EB-5 program in South Dakota.
Would you, aside from EB-5, though, you've criticized some of the grants and loans that have been made available from the Future Fund and other. Would you shut those down and no longer give any direct monetary assistance in the forms of grants or loans to businesses that were looking to expand or relocate to South Dakota?
I absolutely would, but I'm toying with the idea of getting rid of the contractor's excise tax. What that does is that all the little guys, you and I, when we remodel, when we build houses and such, we have to pay a contractor's excise tax of 4%. That makes your house more expensive, it makes any kind of your remodel more expensive. And from the little guys, that 4% goes to, pad the pockets of the big guys. All the big projects, all the governor's friends, all the ones that he wants to bring in, they get the bounty of that 4% that he collects from all of us. And at one time, it was only the governor who made that decision. I kind of raised a little cane about that, and then he said, well, we'll have it in a board that makes those decisions. But how unfair is that? You, the little guy, have to pay your 4% tax and give it to the governor's friends to bring in the business that he wants to. One of the business he brought in, I said earlier, was Manpower. Manpower was an utter failure also. His WINS program, a failure. Why do we keep doing this? The reason why it's a failure is because it's not a Republican way of doing things. The Republican says the government should be a referee. The government should not be a player. We're not supposed to mess with business because we'll corrupt it. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You can see how it has corrupted. It has shown its corruption in South Dakota here. Like I said, Manpower is an example. There may be some. My biggest thing is if it helps the entire state, any business, any utility, any industry that helps everybody. Utilities is a big one. In fact, the only way you're ever supposed to use public-private partnerships is for huge utilities that neither the government nor private property can do alone. But we're having public-private partnerships on food giveaways. in Sioux Falls here. The government should not be that involved in business. My administration, you would see a lot of government out of your life. And yes, I would help some, but it would have to help every single South Dakotan.
So you said I absolutely would. I absolutely would stop the future fund, or you'd absolutely keep them going?
No, I would absolutely cut it way down, and I would have a few in there that would be essential to every South Dakotan. Thank you for that correction. I would have it way schooled down. Okay, and then I am sorry, I was going to bring these handouts for every one of you here, but I just had my copy. And one of the things that bothers me, I'm going on to the healthcare now, is that we have a governor who gets by with saying that he doesn't like the Obamacare. And yet, he actually is bringing Obamacare in. The exchange that we don't have, it's right here. We've had it in place for a long time. We call it a marketplace. Massachusetts calls it a connector. Other states call it the exchange. We have had ours in early and effective. In fact, in 2007, you realize that Dugard and Rounds, they both had a bill that for the individual mandate. The individual mandate. That was, everybody had to buy an insurance product. Well, Brown sold insurance, so I'm sure he did like that bill. But they also had a bill for the state healthcare exchange. This is 2007. Now those bills, thankfully, well not thankfully, because they did not pass, but what did pass, they holocaust one of those bills, and they put in the NIA project. The NIA project, basically, whatever they can't get done in legislation, they do through task force. What happens in Pierre, that if you can't get your legislation through, the governor says, well, let's have a task force on this, and then we'll get all the stakeholders. The stakeholders are people who will make money off the deal, and we'll get our stakeholders in there, and they will be the official experts, and we'll get a couple legislators in there, and they'll carry the legislation, and then we'll get it through that way, because we'll tell everybody in caucus, oh, we've had a task force on this, we've had the experts here. You don't know anything about this, but we do, so we are all going to vote as a team here. You'll hear that too, as a team, and we'll get this legislation in since the task force has already approved it. That's how they get legislation in that can't go through the legislative process. And that's what they did with this healthcare exchange and with the individual mandate. They put it in the NIA task force. And the NIA task force, it has the individual mandate right in it. It has the health information technology. Now, in Dashiell's book here, it says that the #1 goal of Obamacare is health information technology. So South Dakota has risen to the top for the #1 goal of Obamacare. We are #1 in health information technology. The reason why I found that out, my husband back there, he's a chiropractor, and I got an invitation, working in his office, to go to Aberdeen, and the eHealth Collaborative was having a conference. And I went there, and they were so excited. They had this big software giant here from Mid-City, and he goes, oh, he said, South Dakota, love South Dakota. He said, you guys are light years ahead of every other state in the nation on health information technology. He said, we can get all of South Dakota's data. We can get all your personal information. And I was going, no, you can't, because my husband's office, they have to sign a release for your x-rays and stuff. Oh, no, not anymore, he promises. Then the doctor behind me goes, no, he said, in our office we do too. How did this happen? And they explained that what they did is they took your electronic medical records, which is the basis of Obamacare. If your doctor uses electronic medical records, he is an Obamacare doctor, okay? So they're taking everything that goes into your doctor's electronic medical records, and they're putting them in your community health records. Now, your community health records is where your personal information, your vaccines, if you've ever had a really serious disease that the state has to track, those are in your community health records. Well, that was just a decision by the Department of Health just to put those electronic medical records into your community health records, so you don't have control of your data anymore. The state does. In fact, they pushed this through, saying, oh, these doctors, they have to have easy access from one clinic to a hospital or such. Well, that wasn't the gist of this, because this information, if you look at our exchange, that we don't have, by the way, this was, I think, in 2010. Here's our exchange. Here's the individual mandate. You can look at the internet website there where you can get this. It's no longer on the website, by the way. You have to go through an active search to get it. But we have the IRS in our exchange. We have Homeland Security. We have the Secretary of Sebelius, or her counterpart. We have navigators, those are the people who are unvetted, taking all of your personal information and putting it into the system. We have these qualified health plans where only 2 or 3 of the insurance companies get to be on this exchange. Oh no, we've had this a long time. In fact, when I was in the legislature, I complained about a bill, and it was Senate Bill 38 and 43, and all these people just pushed it. All these lobbyists, they just pushed it, and I was just furious at them because I said, this is Obamacare. They said, oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. They lied. They absolutely lied, because even the governor now admits that that Senate Bill 38 was the basis for our insurance exam, our health insurance exchange. And I'll find it someplace. Here it is. It says, specifically, South Dakota Senate Bills 38 and 43 were signed into law by Governor Dugard and will become effective the 1st of July. And he said, this is written by your Lieutenant Governor as a necessary regulatory building block to establish an exchange. We were promised we wouldn't have an exchange. But here we have Senate Bill 38 as being the adopted regulation and statutes concerning Obamacare reforms. So yeah, this is for a grant application for more money, more exchange money. So the bill that they promised us was not going to establish an exchange. In their grant application says to the grantees, oh yes, this bill is our establishment of, this is the building blocks to establish our exchange. Right here, I'll give it to you.
Question for you.
Yeah.
You said Senate Bill 38 and 43 created the exchange, and those are in 2001, I believe. But you also said that a 2007 bill created the exchange.
Did I say 2001? This is Senate Bill 38, 2011.
2011, but you also said that a measure in 2007 created an exchange.
Okay, I'm sorry, there are 2 kinds of exchange. There's one, the information exchange, HIX. Okay, that's what you have to have that in order to make the healthcare exchange go. So the information exchange was created earlier, and then we have the insurance exchange. Okay, there's 2 different kinds of exchanges. And that's where they kind of get you too, because they said, oh, we didn't put in the insurance exchange. No, they put in the information exchange is what you have to use beforehand to make sure that the insurance exchange can go places. You have to have that information hub, all the connections there, in order for the Obamacare insurance exchange to be able to flow.
With regards to Senate Bills 38 and 43, the Dugard administration has said that they had no choice but to pass those, because if the South Dakota hadn't updated its laws to comply with the federal laws, South Dakota would have been out of compliance and could have lost a lot of federal money that currently makes the budget work and balance and all that.
Yes, and that's kind of rude, I think, because here you are selling the people of South Dakota. You realize how miserable your health insurance is right now? Well, that's Dugard saying, oh, we have to do that. He did not have to do that. Our state constitution does not allow for this to even happen. This creates a monopoly. We have a state constitution that says we cannot have monopolies, although he's letting it go because, oh, all the money that we get, and now I'll look like I'm balancing everything. What happens is that a lot of times we get a bunch of money in, and we spend a bunch of money for task force, for meetings, for all these type of things that we don't have to spend. We could save that money, not take the federal money, not have all those task force and meetings and such, and we could just not get that federal money because we don't have to use that federal money to advance the federal program. I'm saying, you say stop, we're not doing this. Other states have done it, we could do it too. Yes, we wouldn't get quite as much federal money, but then we wouldn't have spent all that federal money on these task force to perpetuate it.
You mentioned that Dugard said he had to pass these bills to be in compliance. Were there any states that said, no, thanks, we're not going to pass these bills? Or
well, and every
South
state.
Dakota have been the only one?
No, South Dakota is only one of 2 states that have not voted on a legislative health care exchange. 48 states have legislation on an exchange. South Dakota has not voted on it. However, we have one. So how did we get it? There are 2 ways of getting a health care exchange. One way is by legislative action, and one way is by executive order or department declaration. And we have an exchange. It's obvious we have one. We never really officially legislated on it. We put in the building blocks for it under duress, under, I think, manipulation. But we never had an actual bill. In fact, I had a bill that said if we do have an exchange, we want it to be under legislative control. That was killed by the governor. he said that no, he said that the legislators do not have control whether we're gonna have a legislative exchange in South Dakota, an insurance exchange.
Back to SB 38 and SB 43, were there any states that didn't pass the equivalent?
There probably were. I think South Carolina did not. And that's kind of where I think, that's where I would be well suited, I think, for governor. Because I've been working with insurance since I was 17 years old. And I've been in the hospital and the medical arena since that age, back and forth. I've worked extensively with insurance. I've researched Hillary Care. This is just, Obamacare is actually just an expression or a Hillary Care on steroids, actually. So I studied that. I know that we brought this in basically through third-party payers. Third-party payers, in my opinion, is what it is actually illegal in South Dakota, yet we don't care about our South Dakota Constitution. We just let these third-party payers, these monopolies, in, and that is how Obamacare came in. We started this a long time ago, and I think as governor, I can show other governors how they can take this out of their state also. I know how to take it out of ours. I want to tell other governors how they can take it out of theirs. Okay, Mike, you're up next here, unless there's any other questions.
Howard Corral.
When are you going to have a debate?
I would love to have a debate.
Are any of the TV stations, KeloLand, KDLT, going to have a live debate? Because you have not been heard of. You did not get to speak at the South Dakota Newspaper Association in
I
Peter.
asked, and they wouldn't let me.
And Public Broadcasting canceled you.
Public Broadcasting canceled because they said if both candidates cancel, we will cancel the event. Only one candidate canceled, but they still canceled the event.
So why is the media shutting you down?
I don't know. I wish I knew. But yeah. And granted, the incumbent is not to an incumbent's advantage to have a debate. But I think it's to your advantage. I think it's to the people of South Dakota. It's to their advantage that they have a debate on this, so people know what's going on. And we have this perception that this is just a good old boy, from a one-room schoolhouse. We don't realize that this is a Chicago lawyer who's been around the block a couple of times.
You listed a lot of information today, and put out some allegations or perhaps fact. But I'm curious, is all of this on a website so we can look at it? Because when you lay this out, I'm just trying to be objective critic. It sounds like some of this is put together from bits and pieces from the internet and that I'd like to be able to go to the sources and see that they are verifiable, actual facts.
Yes, you would have to do it through the web archive because they have wiped a lot of this off the internet, but it's still there. In fact, here's a quote. This is from the CCR certification where we have to apply to be certified by this to be in the exchange. It says, Governor Dugard says, his administration, says, while PPACA is Obamacare, this is what Dugard said, while PPACA is unpopular in South Dakota, the administration views it as prudent to proceed with its implementation. Is that what you hear from him? You don't hear that. You don't hear that he thinks it's prudent to proceed with its implementation. And here, a task force meeting. This is also wiped off the internet, but this is a health insurance exchange task force meeting. You heard that right. Health Insurance Exchange Task Force Meeting, August 16, 2011. Lieutenant Governor Matt Michaels says, and he bullet points, continue to advocate for the exchange. He also says, strongly encourage before taking the funding to say you are committed to developing an exchange. And we did take the money. It's pretty prevalent that they are actually on board with putting in an exchange. However, they have the advantage of taking stuff like this off the internet, unless you know where to find it. And I'll give it to you. I had 40 of these copied off, and I left them at home. But I do have them, and I have a copy here that you can make copies here if anybody
You have a
wants it.
website that has this information? I guess
I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's LauraHubbel.com.
You said Obamacare is Hillary Care on steroid. Isn't it more accurate to say that it's Romney Care?
You may be right there.
I think it is.
Yeah, it is Romney Care, but Tom Daschle has been on health care since the early 2000s. In fact, probably back in 1994 when all this started. So, and I've been following this since the early 1990s. And Romney Care is a form of this. And when I talked to Matt Michaels one time, and I said, Matt, this is not about health care. This is about control, and this absolutely is about control. Healthcare, if the government controls all your information, all your healthcare. In South Dakota, we had a bill that said if you are a mental patient, if you have any kind of psychiatric problems or psychiatric health records, those records are going to go to the sheriff, and the sheriff will come to your place and take your guns. They didn't tell you that you could be taking Ambien. Ambien is a psychiatric drug according to our law that we put in place, and that law didn't pass, thank goodness, because I was on the horn about that. But that was part, if you put all the pieces together, a psychiatric drug is Ambien. If you're on a psychiatric drug, the sheriff has the right to come and take your drug. We almost passed that in South Dakota.
Do you think that the drug laws need to be looked at in South Dakota because of things like that? Those little loopholes that backdoor you on things like that?
There's a lot of things that need to be looked at. Yeah, the drug laws are one of them, and yeah, they're pretty inconsistent. Sometimes there's a huge problem with a small infraction, and yeah, they should be more consistent. Yeah.
Isn't the current, I'm gonna call it communist care instead of Obamacare?
I agree.
In the mix of words that they said that they couldn't read it, maybe it was written in Braille, the Obamacare, and then they got drunk on Crown Royal and forgot what they were supposed to do. Tell us about it. But isn't FEMA camps in the Obamacare, in those thousands and thousands of words somewhere?
And see, I don't know, my whole emphasis was I researched Senate Bill 38. That's right here. And Senate Bill 38 is a huge bill. It took me 3 months to get through it. It's 72 pages, and it took, the reason why it took me 3 months is because it had all these acronyms I had to figure out, all these references I had to fill out. And what I found in Senate Bill 38, we just opened the door wide to Obamacare. We gave all the authority, the sovereignty, over to the state rather than the doctor anymore. So it basically ripped off the doctors. And I told Marty Jackley this. I was in his office. I said, Marty, I said, you can't believe this bill. I said, it gives all the power to the state health insurance director and to the state Department of Health. And he goes, well, the doctors should have been there. And another gentleman was with him who's also a lawyer. He said, well, you realize the insurance companies wrote this law, don't you? And what I find interesting is that we have all kinds of connections between Sanford and the governor. In fact, Sanford here says South Dakota campaign funds move sideways, connection of Sanford and Dugard. And Sanford's CEO, I quote, I was at the conference, his Promise Lab conference, and he said, no matter what your politics are, he said, we cannot repeal PPACA, sometimes called Obamacare. He said, because Sanford will have to go back to the drawing board. So if Dugard's biggest supporter is all on board for Obamacare, wouldn't he be also? And is that a Republican way to run a state that is a Republican state? You know, just because you have an R behind your name does not make you a Republican. I am the true Republican in this race.
You talked about, you had brought up FEMA camps. Do you know where the 2 FEMA camps in South Dakota are?
I have heard rumors, but I am not I don't know.
There's one in Yankton, South Dakota, and there's one in Edgemont, South Dakota. And FEMA camps are placed in states because of how the population density is. So a place like New York is going to have a lot more than 2. That's kind of a scary thing that we're moving Obamacare forward, and we have 2 FEMA camps, which is the federal level for our population density. So what's next?
Well, and see, I hear you. I talk to people all over the state. I'm sure you do too, and people are afraid of our federal government, and that's really sad. Some people say when they hear airplanes above, they're kind of going, is that friendly airplane or is that the government? And it's sad that the people have to think that way. One of the reasons why I want to run for governor is because I want to make sure that fear is gone. I want you to make sure you are safe in South Dakota. I want you to make sure that you have a governor that says, no way, federal government, you're not crossing this line. You're not coming into our state and you're not messing with us here. I have a plan basically that says that I would like to have a volunteer sheriff's organization where sheriffs in these large counties that can't be every place at once have a volunteer sheriff, a deputized force where the state will train them, where they will outfit them, and that they can help. The sheriff is the highest law officer in the county. And the sheriff, your county sheriff, can tell the federal governments, no, you can't cross into my county. Your local sheriff is your best protection against the federal government.
Would you encourage the sheriffs to defend South Dakota in the event that the government pulls a seizure of all firearms?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, in a heartbeat.
You should talk, Mike.
Would you let hemp be grown in the state of South Dakota?
Yeah, I'm looking at that. Hemp is an interesting product, and South Dakota at one time gave, I think, one town they gave the prison. They gave Sioux Falls to be the rope capital of the state, and Sioux Falls was supposed to be the hemp rope state. So we've had some, and like I said, I'm still researching that. It's interesting. You have a question?
When you're done.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I still have to research on it. It looks promising, especially for like ethanol development, for that cellulose ethanol. That's being researched in Iowa for hemp being the cellulose product. So it does have some interesting uses.
I have a question. Since Obamacare is kind of passed and already into law, what's kind of the question with Obamacare? What would you want to change?
Obamacare hasn't even been born yet. We are just seeing the beginnings of this nightmare. Obamacare is, in fact, the president has stopped 37 different applications of this law from going into effect. When that goes into effect, you're just going to be crying in night. You're going to have the cold sweats and the misery. People already are with the finances. Just wait. This is not even started yet. And yes, whatever is coming down the pike, I am going to stop. I know where it is. I know how to stop it. Yeah, it's not going to South Dakota if I'm governor.
Stay up here if you would.
Okay.
Laura.
I'll give you the mic though.
Because Laura and I don't agree on everything. But politics make for straighting bedfellows.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say
And Mike, I'm going to introduce him a little bit. Mike has been the CEO of Mayo Clinic, and Mike hates Obamacare as much as I do. He sees the corruption in Obamacare, and he's going to give him kind of that edge there. So.
Well, stick around.
Okay.
And when I say something that you disagree with, you say, Mike,
Okay.
you're wrong.
Okay.
Okay? All
I
right.
can do that.
And I am Mike Myers, and when I'm governor, I will be the oldest governor in the United States. I'm 77. The law school said, isn't it about time, Michael, for you to, a younger person, come in? I was reluctant to do that, but I'll be 78 when I go in, and at the end of the first term, I'll be 82. And I'll come back and we'll talk about whether or not, I should take another run. But you see, the reason I believe that I'm qualified to be the next governor is A, because of my age, and secondly, because of my resume. And I got kind of syrupy here. The pancake platform. The best side of the Republicans and the best side of the Democrats. And Pat Healy said, that sounds real sloppy to me. Take a stand. And I said, well, let's stipulate that God loves Republicans and Democrats the same. Like with the VFW, stop in there. I'm an old veteran with a Navy when I was 17 years old. And they said, ask them the big question, you believe there are more Democrats or Republicans in heaven? And the overwhelming response has been, there's more Republicans in heaven than there are Democrats. Nevertheless, though, I think we could have an upbeat activity here. Best side of the Republicans, best side of the Democrats, and I was the former CEO of that 1,000-bed Mayo St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, and I helped deliver that 1,000-bed hospital from the nuns. And they paid the CEO, just like at Avera, they paid her room and board, $30 a month spending money and a place to pray. And Johnny, a former student of mine, I know all these guys, and they pay him about $1.4 million a year. And Kelby gets about $3 million. So my contention is that the money changers have taken over Pierre. Remember Billy Jekyll, and I knew Billy well, and he went up to the mountaintop and he said, come to South Dakota. where you have hard-working people and they work cheap. And you can charge anything you want for interest rate. We don't believe in that thing called usury. So there's some people I admire. I'm going to emulate Jesus. So I gotta go to a flea market, I'm gonna buy one. Jesus drove the money changers out of the temple. Now, we may not be able to drive the money changers out of the temple, but we can certainly let them know how much goddamn money they're making. And so it really does, the money does corrupt, and the other money changers have taken over healthcare. Healthcare, imagine that vertically, where is Teddy Roosevelt when we need him? Vertically integrated healthcare systems where they collect the money as insurance companies, and they're doing that. And I got a lot of it too, so I'm a sinner too. But they take that, they collect the money and make 20% off of the collecting the money. And then they sit in a revolving chair and ask themselves, how much should we pay ourselves for the 3,200 procedures? And the more they charge, the more they can justify the insurance, and then they turn it over to their own collection agency. So as an old antitrust economics professor, I would take a run at trying to knock off and break up, as a governor, we'd have some antitrust. Now, would you support an effort to bust up that vertically integrated Sanford and Avera? They can't be both.
Well, yes, there's a book called Who Killed Healthcare? It talks about how Sanford got that kind of a power in that book. She's a Harvard graduate, and she actually mentions how Sioux Valley turned to Sanford and vertically then became a monopoly. And yes, monopolies are in conflict with our South Dakota Constitution. They have no business even existing, and yet they do.
Okay, number two. I want to emulate the Pittsburgh Mayor of Pittsburgh, who challenged the tax-exempt status of the Pennsylvania Medical Center. And I want to clean up, I want to challenge the tax-exempt status of Sanford and Avera, because they advertise by the millions of dollars, pay their executives in the millions of dollars, and finance their doctors to do more in the millions of dollars. So I want to jerk their goddamn tax-exempt status unless they begin to behave like those nuns used to behave. Now, would you support that too?
I have supported that for a long time, yes.
We may have more agreement than we
Yeah,
thought.
exactly. It's scary. Yeah, no, that's something I challenge. In fact, I wrote an old artist editorial on that, and I actually lost a job for having that editorial in the, I first became a real estate agent. My first real estate agent, I was hired for one day until that editorial where I said, let's take away their tax exempt status. The next day I said, oh no, you can't work for us. So,
Okay,
I'm on record.
and the third one, my last semester up there at the university, and by the way, probably about 2/3 of those lawyers up there in Pierre were former students of mine, because I've had about 2,000 lawyers come through. I've been in the business of selling JD degrees. And we ship these people off with about $80,000, $100,000 of non-dischargeable student debts. And so I drafted a statute, a real radical statute that I thought Republicans would like and all you small business people would like, and it was called the Healthcare Financial Informed Consent Act. Now, when you walk through that door, of course, I help put those together, those standards of care. We give you a long list, and we give you all those side effects. This may cause depression, anger, bowel problems, and it may kill you. You know, so we do a long job of giving you the risks of the clinical risk, but I wanted them to give you a Healthcare Financial Informed Consent Act, and they would say, Laura, have you been dyeing your hair?
Just a little bit.
We know that.
I did it myself, so it's very good.
If you dye your hair, that requires you have to do test 1, 2, and 3. And when they say test 1, 2, or 3, maybe just an ordinary CAT scan, they'd be obligated to say, by the way, our sticker price is $5,400. It'd be required to disclose the cost of the service or the product prior to delivering that That's the same type of activity that happens every day when you go into the store or you buy any other transaction, and all those, we've just been very passive, so, and that didn't make it to the second floor of the tier. Now, would you be interested in helping support that or not?
Well, yes, you know, when you go to the grocery store, you know what you're buying when you have it in your cart. When you go to the doctor, you have no idea what that's gonna cost. In fact, one time, my dad went there and he had charges for maternity room on his, and he went to the hospital and said, you know, I don't need these charges because I wasn't in the maternity room. Oh, that's okay, the insurance paid it anyway. Yeah, so absolutely, know what you're buying.
And of course, if she would be my lieutenant governor, we'd go and we'd create a South Dakota Health Insurance Cooperative.
I had a bill for that.
Now, that's one piece of Obamacare that's beneficial. We should own the insurance company. We members will own the insurance company and make the determination about what we're going to reimburse for and what we're going to pay. And part of the requirements would be that our members would have to come in and do something real bold, except in an emergency or other condition. But by and large, you'd want to say how much before it's delivered. And we would also have in that co-op, and you know, the federal credit unions and so on, electric co-ops, we would be the benefits of any financial benefit that would come about us taking control over the costs. And if you're a small business person and you're paying $5,000 a year, for example, to take care of old John or old Mike, we're going to give you a healthy member bonus. I'm just a working slug. At the end of each month, if I've been healthy, which is basically code for not going into the system, I'm going to get a check for $125, and I can do something worthwhile with it. And also, as governor, we'll have health insurance, we'll have insurance prerogatives, and we're going to take a look at those premium increases. And I just had a gentleman working on my floor, 62 years old. He says, Mike, I'm with Blue Cross Blue Shield. And my premiums went from $740 up to $980, virtually $1,000 a month to pay to that galdank system because he's afraid he's going to go in. For $1,000, I said, you can go up to Lake Brant, buy yourself a galdank cabin, get a boat, and buy a case of Budweiser every week. Now, what's wrong with this? This is called iatrogenesis. Do you realize that iatrogenesis is the third leading cause of death in the United States? She's helped contribute to the death of a lot of people as a nurse. I contribute to the death of a lot of people as a CEO. And now you have these incredible signs up there saying, Vera saved my life.
Aren't they supposed to?
Well, they saved some lives.
I mean, is
But
that
they killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about that. Iatrogenesis is the third leading cause of death. All the side effects of the drugs, the surgery, the radiation, the chemotherapy. I wouldn't give chemotherapy too, that's a different issue. But so we're going to put together a health insurance co-op, and of course, I taught that stuff for 26 years. And when they put together these nice little states, we all went up and had their committees. I taught most of these galdank people, but I was never quite invited. Because they've been after me for a long time, and I survived. Because Betty Asher used to be, for example, on the board of Sioux Valley and Sanford. And she'd go up there and she would say, and they would say, that galdang no good Professor Myers. We gotta get rid of him. So I came up after, I got lucky. I gave up after 3 years. I came up for tenure, and she sent her guy down there and they denied tenure, but they ended up a couple of good deans, put together some contracts. So I survived for 23 years, year to year. But they were just so unhappy and so I get on a radio program called the Healthcare Marketplace every Saturday morning over radio station KSO. And they're paying them $150 for it. Came in one morning and they said, Professor, the manager wants to see you. Oh, okay. Myers, what? We've canceled your show. Why? No, why? have you just canceled it. Yeah, I felt pretty bad about that, Laura.
I bet.
Well, about 3 or 4 months later, a guy came in the back of my classroom. I always taught at 8 o'clock in the morning. And after class, he said, Professor, did you ever wonder why your show got canceled? And I was kind of curious. Fred called the manager and reminded the manager that Avera was buying $55,000 worth of advertising each year from KSOO. And you're letting this Myers come on and make all these negative observations about our wonderful healthcare system. Now clearly, if you were the manager at KSO, you'd probably done the same thing, but this goes back to the corruption we're talking about. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, and they tell me, Myers and Laura, you don't want to be fighting Dugard and the gang, you'll be fighting the media as well, because the media does thrive off of, and boy, they pump a lot of money. So again, going back to the millions of dollars that are spent on those billboards, and I want to see a board up there, Avera killed my mother, or something. And we had a case down in Yankton, they did kill the old man, no question about it. But the power of the money and the concentration, and so today is an interesting, of course, I did this Elder Law Forum radio program, and I had to get off that because I jumped into this thing called politics. Why would you do that? Well, because I'm probably about as well situated as anybody could possibly be to go in and kind of shake things up and kick things around, because once again, 77 years old, wife is deceased, live alone in this big 6-bedroom house, got a good background in terms I know where the money comes from and where it goes, and the last guy they want to see walking in there along with Laura Hubbel is me. So yesterday, and this is what's kind of relative, yesterday I delivered to the Secretary of State's office a bundle of signatures. Now remember, as an independent, I gotta get 3,171 signatures. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, you get about, how many did you have to get?
About 2,000.
About 2,000. So I delivered this, I had Debbie Peace and daughter do a count for me, and we went up there and gave that to the Secretary of State yesterday afternoon, stopped at the Peer Journal, and we called about 4, and they haven't yet given us, maybe.
Oh, come on, just tell us, are you on or not?
Well, we're waiting for the call. Did we get the call back
Well,
yet?
just talked to them about an hour ago, the numbers are good, you've got the
numbers are good?
signatures.
What?
Yes.
What?
You're almost an official candidate, you just need the signature by Jason Gaddy,
Oh, God.
and he's official, 99.9.
Right. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10, and 11, and 12, and 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
All right.
All right, now that's good news. I mean, my students do 20 push-ups at the beginning of every class.
I can do that, I can get down.
All right,
Yes.
well, how about the cost of getting copies? We talked about that.
The first
information?
copy is free. The copy at the Secretary of State, copies of your signatures, you mean?
No, I'm talking about when we wanted a list of the independent voters, so I could tell them what a wonderful person I was by email.
Oh,
We'll
We
get
want
that.
$5,000 to give me a hard copy, and
Oh, I
$2,500 to give me
told,
a button.
Yeah,
huh?
that is our Secretary of State, yeah, that's what it would cost me too.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we can join in together and try to.
Well, we're gonna go for an Easter egg hunt. We're gonna look for that $70 million. And we got a group of nice people, and a lot of nice people called the Guardians for Dugard. We got $1.7 million laying there, and I got 4 Social Security checks. My daughter said, Dad, you're going broke. But 1.7, Guardians for Dugard, if we did where did that money go, I would imagine, and that's not hard to believe, they probably enjoyed some of that. Now, what are you gonna do about that, Laura?
Well, I don't know, when he announced actually, he just announced, but when Dugard announced, I think he used a plane to go back and forth. And maybe he paid for himself, I'm not sure, but we didn't have that kind of advantage. But it is interesting, and it is 12:30, and if you guys, you know, if you're done, you can hang around here. If you're not, and stay up here and answer questions. But yeah, you talk about I said in 2011, I said in insurance exchange with Rake, South Dakota, I said 2011, I said 2013, 2014, you're gonna have just the same nightmares I have when you see all your premiums rise $200 to $300 a month. And it's exactly what has happened, and it is killing people. People are paying now more for their health insurance than they are for their house payment. That is ridiculous. When I was in the healthcare since I was age 17, become a nurse and have been involved, I have seen where the hospitals have gone from being a benevolent society to being a cutthroat business entity. I saw that change. And yeah, we have people now who are cutthroat business people who are in the hospital associations and who are running our healthcare. That does no good, because what do they want? They want more product. And you are their product. So that's a big change. We don't see that benevolence. They don't want you in the same vein that the nuns would. So they're not going to treat you the same as they would. So that's it. Any questions?
Everybody loves somebody someday. Republicans can embrace the Democrat too. Yeah. Well, that's really good news.
How can they ever reach that?
I'm on the ballot.
Well, 99.9, we just need to, you've got all the
Oh,
signatures.
Jason has to
Gotta
sign
sign
it.
it.
Jason has to sign this before I'm really on the ballot.
Yeah, but the numbers are
Yeah,
there.
Jason's number, you tell him,
Yeah.
You know,
you seem like a nice guy,
Just make
why
sure.
don't you sign it?
right.
You know, you look at it, you can't even stand to watch anything, let alone that.
You know, calling guy, you call him, you tell him to come up and talk to him if you don't sign it. Will you do
They'll
that?
sign it.
Yes. Oh, yes. Nice to use your studio. You know, until, Gordon told us.
Oh, yeah, I actually was out there with us.
Oh, he was, okay, yes,
Just ask you a couple questions. Just go back to the other things, get you to your first and last name as well.
Pardon?
Michael.
Yes.
The governor.
Good question. They gotta move the rest along.
We move into a system, I believe, that is, I believe that Government Integrity Institute that came up and identified South Dakota as the second.
Yeah, I know. Well, hopefully, they'll debate.
I like South Dakota, we need to understand why we're that corrupt. Concentrating on taking care of market power. I can take risks. Again, because I'm not just a family involved. I have a good background. And my resume, okay, let's do them together at a good time. And I think I can walk in there and there's some things. I'm going to get all of this. I was down to collect the signatures, you know, and these people are coming up, give me a big hug. Jesus ministry, we need you, we love you, and these guys are.
What's your info beyond stuff?
Down south.
Is that independent?
Yeah, Sioux Falls.
He's gonna be right.
Yesterday, I was
You're
looking
gonna have
at
the
kids
Democrat
at
pro-Obama.
marijuana use and, stuck to my back, and I see what I can do in a way that's professional.
If they're gonna let her, you know, I mean,
Sit down.
media,
Right.
forward. Awesome. That was really nice to show. I was nervous nobody would show. So, you bet, you have a good day. Let's go ahead and my last election.
Now, what are you going to do?
Killed it.
Now,
Oh.
what
And
are
then
the other things that you're
you guys just quit. I mean, it was just like, and the thing is, it was so unstaged. It was just, you just were talking to them and, you know, you're getting the truth out.
Well, yeah, and that's what I want, just get that truth out there.
Yep. We need a debate though.
Yeah, we do need a debate. Let's see, how do I stop this?